Well, hello, Earthlings. This is Roger Yates and Ruja. Say hello. There we go. Now, I haven't done one of these for a long time. The hair, yeah. Well, I figured that if I just let it grow, then you could work out, how long it's been between one post and the other, one vlog and the other. You stop bashing into my mic, hey, Ruj, or what? So, yeah. Now, this video is entirely the fault of Jake Conroy. In fact, I've just finished and published a podcast with Jake, which was, I think, very interesting and very thought-provoking. Jake wants to bring back the kind of pressure campaigning that was going on in the 80s and 90s, leading to the kind of Shack campaign, and thinks that vegan education, which is all the vogue at the moment, is just not going to cut it, that one person at a time, one plate at a time is just not fast enough. And I can see the point. And Jake makes the point that some scientists are saying that we've got about a decade left, so we can't mess around, and so do we have time for one plate at a time, which is a Steve Best idea, one person at a time? Do we just literally have time for that? We also talked about things like supply and demand. So I'm going to put a link to the podcast in the blurb below. And I don't have all these things flashing up on the screen because I don't know how to do all that. But one issue that we did talk about as well was whether we should make a distinction between plant-based and vegan. And Jake's position was interesting to me because he was basically saying that it's another kind of division that we kind of don't need. Whereas I'm actually fairly supportive of it, so long as we don't see plant-based as a pejorative, as an insult, but as a description. And the reason that I think this is important is we've been watching those people who keep up with YouTube and the YouTube vegan scene, as it were, which can be pretty messy, if not toxic. But we've been seeing recently all these ex-vegans who are now kind of eating meat and obviously just not only kind of moving away from veganism, but actually kind of becoming anti-vegan in the kind of Tim Shieff kind of way. And it's interesting to me because I tend to think that if we were to maintain the distinction between plant-based and veganism, then we wouldn't have all these kind of anguished video responses about the loss of all the vegans, because most of these people don't seem to be vegan in the first place. They don't seem to have really taken on board the overarching justice for all philosophy of veganism, for example. A lot of them started out as health vegans and continued throughout. The difficulty really, and again Tim Shieff fits into this, is because we always say, well, if you become vegan for any reason and then you become exposed to the ethics, the philosophy of veganism, then you might, as it were, take on board the philosophical side of it. Yeah. Now, that's what we always hope, and in some senses, that's what we suggested happened to Tim Shieff. And so he starts off as a health vegan and then becomes an ethical vegan. And of course, he was involved with the group Ethics. So that's a kind of complication to my position, really, in a sense. But I still think that the distinction between plant-based and veganism is very important. And not least, kind of almost like on the psychological level, me, a sociologist, saying this, but on the psychological level, it means that there wouldn't be such distress and trauma created when a plant-based person stops being plant-based. What we're seeing is a lot of people saying, oh, we've got all these vegans and they're stopping being vegan. That's the bit, I think, which is a mistake. telling the plant-based and the vegans apart is the difficulty. And I do kind of realize that that's a kind of weakness in the point I'm trying to make in a way. But it still seems to me that for the sake of the movement, and this is another kind of movement issue, I sometimes wonder, because there's always claims that we like the idea of the vegan movement being as big as possible, and we've got people like Tobias Leonhardt, the so-called vegan strategist, the vegetarian tactician, if that, saying that we should lower the bar, and so people who eat other animals should be regarded as vegan. Well, obviously, I would reject that, and I hope that you would too. But it is a way of making the vegan movement bigger, because if you, as it were, just destroy the definition of veganism, then and allow the eating of other animals, then of course the vegan movement is going to be a lot bigger. I sometimes think it might be necessary to make the vegan movement smaller in order to then make it bigger. And what I mean by that is that we need to reassert that veganism is an ethical thing, it's a philosophical thing. I talk about the radicalism of the vegan social movement pioneers. What we really need to do is reassert that they represent veganism, and all this plant-based stuff and all this animals only stuff and all this veganism is a diet stuff is not really veganism, so that does mean that for a period while we sort all that out, the vegan movement would appear to be smaller, but it would be more ethically consistent, and I think that would be a good thing. We need to know, I think there's a kind of echo really with animal rights here. Most people in the animal rights movement are, welfarists of some type, and again, I think Jake would see that, well, look out, another division. But the point is, these divisions, these differences are real and they're meaningful, So it seems to me that if we can get, as it were, people's description right, it would help us to understand their position. And if they are plant-based and then they stop being plant-based, that does not mean that we've lost a vegan. It means that we've lost somebody who was plant-based and was plant-based all along, or in the first place, and never really kind of understood or took on board the kind of ethical part of it. And in some ways, that's another movement issue. In some ways, it will be our fault if, when they do think they're moving into the ethics of veganism, they kind of get it wrong, because the movement doesn't present the ethical side of it very well, and certainly not very consistently, and not as radical as it could and should be. So that's a kind of issue too. But I say, ultimately, to finish, that the distinction between plant-based and vegan is not a bad one. It can be seen as divisive. I understand that. I understood Jake's point. But I think it's necessary in order to kind of defend veganism from all these plant eaters suddenly starting chomping on other animals again, and seeing that as oh God, veganism is in crisis. Doesn't mean that at all, I don't think. It just means that a plant eater has started to eat other animals, not that a vegan has. Okay. I'll see you again. Thanks for watching, and take care, everyone. Goodbye, Earthlings.